Good evening, everybody. As you know, we are a voluntary group in the Borders. We were the last group to be formed by SSRS. So basically, we've done really well with our group and lots of supporters. So basically, just going to tell you all about red squirrels. So we're going to have the facts of red squirrels, the problem with greys, reds versus greys, what's been done to help red squirrels, how successful are we being, and then questions and answers. Okay. Right, common name, Eurasian red squirrel. Its scientific name, Squirrel vulgaris. It is Greek meaning, which is a lovely thing, the animal who sits in the shadow of its tail, which I think is a lovely way of describing a red squirrel. Really, really nice. Their lifespan is 3 to 6 years, but they can live a bit longer. If they're in captivity, they can live to about 12 years, 12 or 13 years. Their weight is, I was always taught, would be when we got a large Mars bar. Would be the weight of a large Mars bar is the best way to describe it. Which you don't see anymore, do you? So that's their weight. Their habitat, coniferous, mixed and broadleaf woodland. We'll talk a bit more about that after. Their diet is nuts, seeds, tree shoots and other plant matter. Now the plant matter is mushrooms, which they will, and toadstools that they can eat. They will take these and shove them into cracks of trees to dry them for the winter, so it has a nice little supply of dried mushrooms and toadstools to eat, along with all the nuts that it buries and that. It'll eat caterpillars, it will eat birds' eggs occasionally, being a rodent, and that, but that's not very often. It basically is carnivorous, coniferous trees and that. And then its predators are pine marten, birds of prey, foxes and stoats. Its origin is, it is native to Britain. It's been around in Britain since the Ice Age, since the end of the Ice Age. And it's done really well until the late 1700s, when for some reason it has a checkered past in for about 150 years of that, where it started to decline badly. And everyone, the scientists, think it was because we were felling that much of our forests and that their habitat was just being lost. So by the end of the 1700s, things were so bad that the scientists, whoever they were back then, realised that they were going to have to introduce squirrels back into Scotland, southern Scotland particularly, and Ireland, because they were just about extinct, which all sounds incredible now when you think about that. And so anyway, they introduced squirrels from England, but they also introduced squirrels from Europe. Now, I've always been told that, I lived in Argyll for 34 years, so I have lived with red squirrels, just red squirrels for 34 years. And we have all shades and colours there. And what I would get told was that they thought why we would say almost black-backed red squirrels and grey red squirrels was because they had come from Europe. So, you know, how much fact there is in that, but that's what I was told by the experts. And then, once they got the numbers back up, they were doing so well. And this is the sad story, by 1900s, because you had the Victorians who, you know, as we all know, killed all the predators, all the gamekeepers, and they massacred the predators, so the grey squirrel population was huge. But basically, after that, 1920, around then, they had clubs for killing red squirrels. So it seems incredible now, but it was a club in Cornwall, and it was the Red Squirrel Club, and they went out and shot red squirrels because naturally they thought, you know, they were decimating the woods. And I was told up in Scotland, the Forestry Commission back then killed thousands of red squirrels because of them chewing trees. And then naturally in late 1800s, also the biggest impact was when grey squirrels were brought here. They were brought over, the first grey squirrels to come into Scotland were over in Argyll. And then a few years later, there were squirrels brought over to Edinburgh and to Fife. So that was the start of, you know, the Victorians. Once again, I think it'd be lovely to have grey squirrels here. So that was the start of them in Scotland, but also around that same time they were getting brought down into the big estates in England as well. The interesting thing is that the American grey squirrel that was brought down into England is the one that's carrying the pox virus. What they found is the grey squirrels that were brought into Scotland came from Canada, and hence why we never really saw pox virus in Scotland, apart from naturally because it's moved up from England with the grey squirrels from England. But there's supposed to be something that, you know, the Canadian grey squirrels were not carrying the pox virus the same. Right, okay.
Well, you forgot about me then.
I just go on and So the red squirrel is an icon of our woodland and British countryside. 75% of the population is in Scotland, 120,000. The mortality rate in their first year can be 50%, which is pretty high on that for young squirrels, and there's all reasons why. The main dangers facing the red squirrel is road accidents, predation, starvation, squirrel pox or other diseases such as leprosy, and plus just being infested with fleas can get their conditions so down. Do you know, Alish, I had the screen with all the bits so I could remember what's coming up next.
John, explain, just turn around and see.
Oh dear, right, Drees, right. Oh dear, change of land. And that's so. The other one is, you know, over the years, as we all know, we have lost so much of our habitat and forestry, our natural forests, and that have been decimated. And that, so you end up with red squirrels in teeny little populations which cannot move on. And that, so you end up with no corridors for these squirrels to move on and to escape. So, right. Their habitat is mixed woodland. They live in drays and dens. The dray is beautiful, it's all sticks, and when you open it up inside, it's full of moss and feathers and hair, and it's beautiful and soft inside. They usually make a dray halfway up the tree because it doesn't want to be exposed right up on the top for the wind, and that, so it'll be, you know, kind of stuck in the middle of the tree where it's strong and it's going to be protected. What I was reading is that sometimes when there's a lot of pine martens about, they will sometimes make their drays further out onto the branches, which is a way of protecting their drays when they've got young in them, so the pine marten can't get out to them. The other one is their dens. Now in Argyll, because of our wonderful wet weather up there, most of our red squirrels, I reckon, lived in dens in trees, and that because they were going to be much drier and much more protected from the horrendous gales that we would get, and just rain and rain for months on end. So, right, next one. Also with the drays, they will have up to 2 or 3 drays. They can have more, and they will move around in these drays. And if a dray gets really infested with fleas and that, they will move on into the next dray. But they will use all of these drays. And in the winter, if it's really bad, they will share the dray. And if they're like family related and that, they will curl up together in the dray. And that, just to keep warm. Food. So it's acorns, pine cones, berries, buds early on with the trees, fungi. Now, everyone thinks that they're going to be fine, the squirrel, in the summer, and it's just winter time that they're really struggling, and that, but it's not the case. The worst time for squirrels is the middle of the summer, because at that stage there is no food. The buds have all gone and produce leaves. You do not have the seeds of the trees yet, you don't have the berries, you don't have the fungi. So it's the one time that you can really feed the red squirrels because they are struggling in the middle of the summer. Their predators, goshawk, a few birds of prey would try to take them, but the goshawk being a big bird. Wildcat, which we basically wouldn't really see any wildcats down here, and pine marten, which we do see here now. And that. Now, all of these have coexisted with red squirrels since the Ice Age. So they've all coexisted quite happily together, even though they all predate on red squirrels. The pine marten, what I used to see back up north, was the squirrel would come, the squirrels would be on my wall in the garden feeding. They would disappear back into the woods, and then all of a sudden in the middle of the day, pine marten would come over the wall, have a look at us, oh right, I'm going in to get the nuts. He would have a feed, disappear over the wall, and within 5 minutes of him disappearing, the red squirrels would be back into the feeder boxes and feeding. And Forestry Commission seen the same thing. Wherever they had feeding stations, they would say the same thing, that at the minute the squirrels left, pine marten would be there. The minute he left, the red squirrels were straight back onto the feeding station. So it made no odds. Now, regarding reds and pine martens, if they want to escape from a pine marten, they're so light they can get right out onto a branch, and that, which he's a big animal. You know, he's about that long with his tail as well. And it's like seeing a small cat with very thick, short legs. So he can't get out onto a light branch. So that is the saviour for the red squirrel, that he can get right out onto the end and he can't get there. But if it's squirrels on the ground, or he's sick, or he just wasn't alert enough, he'd get caught and ate just the same. Right. And this is a sad one, these maps to look at. It's tragic. 1945. Look at that map with all the red, which is all reds. And down south London and all this, the greys, because naturally it was all in that area, greys were brought in on the big estates. And then the orange is both. And you look at it by 2000. I mean, it's tragic to see what has happened. And, and Ireland as well. It's really grim. 2010. And it's even worse. Hence why SSRS and all these groups and the English groups and all this have been formed to try and save our red squirrels. Because, who can say how many years and they will become extinct completely. So, thank you. The problem with the greys. Right, the biggest problem for the red overall, it was the introduction of the grey from America. And it carries the squirrel pox virus. Once a red squirrel is infected, it will be dead within 10 to 15 days. It's horrendous to see. It looks like myxomatosis, what you would see in a rabbit. Exactly the same. Big head, swollen hands and just curled up. Got a picture over there of one of them, and that awful. Some of them actually, they're now finding that some red squirrels recover, which is a great thing. Some of them just seem to be getting an immune system to it, and there's the odd ones that are surviving. So it's good to hear that. Invasive species, it costs the Scottish economy over 250 million a year in its destruction of trees. And it just strips the bark and the trees just all die. Because as we know, once you ring a tree all the way around, the tree just dies. And that's a heck of a lot of money that the government is losing to grey squirrels. And also, they damage telephone wires, electricity cables, they go into the roof of your house and chew your electricity cables. I mean, they do all kinds of damage, and because they're so blasé, they eat songbirds' eggs and their chicks. They're destructive to maize and corn crops and orchards. So they're not good, even though they are cute to look at, but they're not good. Facts. Right, the eastern grey squirrel. And as you can see the name, I'm not going down this road again. So the lifespan is 2 to 5 years. Once again, they will live a lot longer in captivity, but you can see the weight of them. They are much bigger and just heftier, more robust animal than a red squirrel is. They're not much longer than a red. Their diet is nuts, seeds and berries. The population is 2.7 million, which is pretty horrendous. The threat to greys, road traffic, foxes, stoats, birds of prey and pine martens. Discuss that after. Origin, North America. Now when you're looking to make sure you're looking at a grey squirrel, you're looking for the halo, which is, you see the white hair all around their tail. So whether he was sitting in front of you with his tail up, you can see a proper white edge all the way around his tail. And that's the best way to know that you are seeing a grey squirrel. Because greys can be melanistic, they can be black, which I don't think we really see them up here, but down south they are. And they can also have a lot more red in them than just on their heads and on their tail. So from afar, you can think, oh, it's a red. But actually it's a grey just with a lot of chestnut in the coat. But just remember the halo that time, and they never have ear tufts. Okay. Right, okay. So you're basically seeing the differences. And it's a good way, SSRS will do things where they have about 5 pictures of, 5-6 pictures of reds and greys mixed up. And you've got to be able to pick out which is which, just more by their shape than by just seeing big colours like this. And you can learn to identify it. It is a slightly different shape, as well as having the halo tail. And red squirrels always have their ear tufts. Some of them lose their ear tufts in the middle of the summer, and some of them will have no ear tufts right in the peak of the summer. But as the autumn comes in, these pretty lovely tufts come back on again. And the red, have a go around with the colours.
We've got that at the end.
Right, just keep me right, please.
Okay.
Right, okay, well,
That's
move on, yes. Right. Red Squirrel Conservation History. The Red Squirrel Survival Trust was set up in 2006. This was because everyone realised that, we were seriously going to lose our red squirrels for just the little pockets of reds down in England, on the Isle of Wight and Anglesey. And so something had to be done. Prince Charles became the patron of the Red Squirrel Survival Trust, which is the main group. So that is the English version of the SSRS, Saving Scotland's Red Squirrels. SSRS was set up a year later. SSRS works in partnership with Nature Scot, Scottish Forestry, Scottish Land and Estates, Red Squirrel Survival Trust, RSPB, and we ignore the little one because that's the same thing up there. So all these groups work together and support. Our group back up in Cowell was formed way at the beginning. I think we started in 2009, and we had so much support from Forestry Commission and SMH, which was then, and that to help us to protect our red squirrels. Then RSST established UK Squirrel Accord, which was suggested by the Prince of Wales in 2015. And that is really large. This is consists of 41 leading nature conservation groups. So you have the heritage, timber industry, government organisations, and all of them working with the woodlands to protect our red squirrel. So it's great news, and there's so much research going on now, to protect our reds and other ways of trying to get rid of grey squirrels. This is the map of SSRS showing you the park areas and that. So you have the 5 project areas in Scotland, which, as you can see, Argyll, Tayside, North East Scotland, Dumfries and Galloway, and the Borders. And then in our area we have 10 parks, which they set up. And actually this is us here, and this one. And that. So basically we have 17 groups in the Borders and Galloway. So from here, right the way across to Berwick, is the 17 groups have been formed. And it's really good news because we have a forum just for our groups that we all have to go to every so often and meet and see how we are all getting on and who needs help and who doesn't need help and all these kinds of things. And the Berwick group has been running because they basically work on both sides of the border. So John Ray and his group goes right up to Duns and that, but they also work in Northumberland and that, but they have been running for years and years, way before SSRS was ever formed and that. But the rest of us down here are all new. But it seems to be working well. Some groups are struggling a bit, but most of them are established now, like us. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. So if you get the gist of that, Pine Martin is the enemy of the squirrel, the red squirrel, but he's also a very good friend because all the research that's gone on now and is still going on, and that it was first researched in Ireland, in Northern Ireland, where they realised as the pine marten population was starting to grow that here, sorry, I got sidetracked there, that wherever the pine martens were coming back in numbers, the grey squirrels were disappearing. So there were some super big articles back then, which I'm sure some of you read about, wow, how is this happening? And that, so there was more and more research done, and eventually, they were saying, right, wherever the pine martens come back, the grey squirrel population really is demised and decreases remarkably well. And then, of course, naturally, pine martens have started coming back down from the highlands and moving down, as they are now a protected species and they're not classed as a predator by gamekeepers, which I know they probably still do, but they are protected. So now the pine martens are just moving down and down. There's pine martens in the borders, in Galloway now, they're in Kielder Forest, they're in other parts of Cumbria, Northumberland. There's quite a population in Wales now, and I think they're trying to reintroduce them back down into England, right down south. So pine martens are natural predators to squirrels, and they enjoy the same habitat. But because of the red squirrel and pine marten way of going on is that, they just get on okay. But regarding the grey squirrel, what some people had said was, when a pine marten comes along, the grey squirrel doesn't know what a pine marten is. So its reaction is so much slower before it realises that it is a predator, and hence the pine marten can catch it. Now, there's people who some say, yeah, that's right, and others who are not, so it's still ongoing that whether, that is right. And the other one is that when a grey squirrel runs out onto a branch, because he's heavier, he can't get right out onto a branch. So naturally, if the pine marten can, he can catch it. So, it's good news all around, even though, pine martens, eat birds' eggs and they eat pheasants' eggs, and which is what the gamekeepers hate, and that. So there's a good and bad with the pine marten, but he is a most beautiful creature. So we'll just have to see what the scientists say, as they find out more and more information about him. Right, this is the Highland Corridor, which is the Highland fault line, which is running from the west coast back back up to Dundee. So it's the actual fault lines where SSRS decided that they would make that the complete line where everything above that fault line will eventually just be red. It was the easiest way to try and control the grey, was to just have a line and say, right, Aberdeen's done a fantastic job of getting rid of their greys, and I don't think they've got an awful lot left now, but they've made such a good job of it that eventually, I think, to keep that line, I think they will manage to do that. And as you can see, all the reds as well on the other side here, and that. But unfortunately, because we have the central belt here, our boss back then, Mel Tonkin, who was the scientist and ran all of this, she tried and spoke to Glasgow Council and Edinburgh Council to try and get them to start trapping. As we know, the grey squirrels are all in Prince's Gardens and that, and they wouldn't entertain it. And of course, everybody likes in Glasgow and Edinburgh, oh, they're cute, they don't see anything else. So, nobody there wants to trap them and dispatch them. So we're stuck with this horrible plight of this central belt, which I think they kind of accept now we're never going to get rid of the greys. So basically the groups have all been formed, and the idea is if we can keep the numbers down of greys, the reds come back, and we can, as long as we can help them and support them, then they will have to coexist together. But if we can keep the numbers of the greys down along with the pine marten, and that, then we should be able to manage in the borders. And naturally in Northumberland and Cumbria as well. And that, but the sad fact is, unless the councils there change their attitude, there's always going to be this issue of this massive amount of greys in the central belt. And that. It's weird because in Newcastle, they've done fantastic things in Northumberland and Newcastle, and people there are all for trapping in their gardens, and they've done so much education, and that, Newcastle's a big city, and that, but you can't, it just seems you can't do anything in Edinburgh and Glasgow, so kind of really sad with that one. And this is our sightings, which I've got a wee map down there which you can pick up and have a look at. This is our boundary of our group. This was what would you call it? It's the park,
the priority area.
The priority area that SSRS said was what our group was working on. But now that we are we're still helped by SSRS, but because SSRS is moving back up north and hasn't got the funding, lots of our groups are on our own now. So, we can spread out and we can help and support people out of that line. But it's just that's the way it was with SSRS. That was our park boundary. What we had. But you can see, we've got some red dots, and folk keep, get in touch with us and say, I've seen a red. So the little pockets of reds are here, just that we need to get rid of more greys to help the reds come back here and be the way it was before. And to find squirrels, with all our volunteers who would like to help us, and that we have a feeder box and a camera trap. And what we would do is we half fill it full of peanuts, strap it to the tree, the feeder box. We put a sticky label on the underneath of the box, the lid. So as he climbs in, and that there's a sticky part which you pull off with the Velcro, and when he goes down, his hair sticks to the sticky tab, and then we can peel that off if there's anything on it, and look at that through a microscope to see whether it's red or grey, or maybe there's a pine marten on it. And of course the camera trap is great because that really lets you see what's coming and going all of the time, and you never know what's going to run up the tree and that. Also feeding signs, so we would be looking at cones to see, if they're dropping their cones and chewing, and whether it's a mouse or it's a red squirrel. We do a transects, which is a certain area that you would walk up, and you would just walk up, picking up cones all the way up, and then they're added up, and that's more.
I'm looking for the traits as well.
Yes,
from the
yes.
transect, yeah.
But you would be more with the transect side of that. So there's quite a few things, and really interesting what we can do. And there is a feeder box with a little red squirrel in it, sitting there. Just think, this is a nice home here. It's full of nuts. Oh dear. And of course also they get very frustrated when they're young. And I used to watch them in the garden, and the little ones would come down and they would be jumping up and down, going mad because they weren't strong enough to lift the lid with their head, or they couldn't work it out, and they would be squeaking, bouncing up and down, trying to get the lid up so they could get in. And you had to get in. Oh dear. Looking at the hair samples, this is what we would see under the microscope. And as you can see, a grey squirrel, you will always see it's banded with the white and the black. I mean, it takes a bit to get used to, recognising that. And then of course you see the red squirrel hair, and that which is wispier, but eventually you start to get an eye. It's not always easy to do. But that's basically what we would do, to have a look at the hair samples. And then, back to colours, as you can see. Now, you see that one on the left, that grey? Yeah. But you see, in our guide, we have lots of red squirrels that look that colour. And it's so easy. If you're seeing that in your garden or running away, oh, there's a grey. And I mean, in our guide, we didn't have any greys. But you just see how you can be fooled into thinking that you're seeing a grey and you're not. And then you see grey squirrels, with the melanistic and black. And then a grey squirrel with, you see once again, the real chestnutty browns in his coat. And that's what we've seen from the front in the summer. It would be quite easy. And then of course you get the amazing colours as well, albino and black. And red squirrels, they can have white blonde tails, black backs, stripy tails, blonde, black, going down the tail. And that's a good way of knowing who's about. And that, so that just lets you see the colours.
And that's it.
All right. Yeah. So, was there anything anybody wanted to ask me?
Well, no. We're not saying coffee questions
I
and afterwards.
I was just going to see if anybody wants to ask something right now.
So save your voice. So, yeah, thank you, Jack.